Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, which is the latest in our Alumni Day of Action series, as well as our latest in the Newcastle Develop series, event series as well. Today's event, as it says on the slide, is neurodiversity, inclusion, and the workplace. And we're joined by two of our three panelists who will be sharing their own sort of lived experiences of neurodiversity and inclusion. Unfortunately, our third panelist, Timmy, is stuck somewhere traveling. He was flying back today and has clearly, unfortunately, got delayed. So fingers crossed he can make it for at least part of the event. But not to worry, we're in very good hands with both Alex and Ashley. I would like to take a moment before we start the event that the aim of this evening's discussion is to provide a platform and a space for us to for our panelists to discuss like personal experiences and insights around what is a really broad and quite complex topic. We aren't by any means experts and professionals. We're just hoping that this will provide kind of a platform for people to begin to talk about this sort of stuff and think about how it affects their workplace and their sort of everyday interactions in their environments. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Alex Isles. So if you can introduce yourself, that would be great.
Fantastic. So my name's Alex. I run a guided tours company up here in the northeast of England. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 9 years old and went to a special needs boarding school up in Scotland, where it was focused on many other children who had similar learning issues within the normal education system from across Europe. So I've got an experience of growing up in an establishment which was full of people who had various different what we termed in today's thing as neurodiverse experiences. So that's my sort of background there as well, and I'm also self-employed, so I'll be talking a little bit about that experience too.
That's great, Alex. Thank you very much. And our other panelist for this evening is Ashley King.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm Ashley King. I am an entrepreneur, or I call myself a creative entrepreneur. I'm also an alumna of Newcastle University Business School, which I recently completed my MBA. During my studies, I was very ill. I had some very serious issues with anxiety and depression. And what I didn't know at the time was that untreated ADHD can lead to anxiety and depression. And so I have been recently diagnosed within the last year with ADHD, and it has been life-changing. It's changed everything I thought about myself, my career, my goals and aspirations. And so I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about. And I'm very happy the university is starting this conversation just to explore some of the challenges that people go through. So I'm really excited about tonight. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Thank you very much, both of you, for taking some time out of your very busy schedules to talk about this topic. It's great. We just moved the slides on one. You can see just a quick blurb about Timmy, who unfortunately isn't here at the moment. He is a researcher at the university in health economics. He's been diagnosed since the age of 4, and he's been a really passionate advocate of neurodiversity pretty much for his entire post-university career, as far as I'm aware. He has a website called The Black Dyspraxic, which has got some absolutely fascinating articles and podcasts and some videos on. So if you can't make it, it's really worth going to his website and taking a look at some of the work that he's done, because it's absolutely fascinating. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm really sorry that Timmy can't be here. Fingers crossed he makes it for a bit, but he's definitely well worth looking up after the event. He's got some great stuff. Great. Okay, so again, don't forget, please put questions in the Q&A box as we're talking about things. We'll try and get to them as they crop up. But we'll get into the discussion. And I think the big question and the first question that I know we've talked about even before this event is the use of labels, things like neurodiversity, disability, being disabled, helpful or not? And if not, why not? And I think, Alex, I'll come to you for that, so your first thoughts on that.
Cool. So well, first of all, it's quite hilarious how I discovered that I was apparently neurodiverse, because I was catching up with a good friend of mine who works within education, And we were sat there and I was talking about various experiences I'd had and stuff like that. And he suddenly turns to me and he goes, well, as a neurodiverse individual, obviously this is quite tough for you. And initially I thought he was just joking. I thought he had come out with this word, and quite funnily enough, we both used to play computer games and role-playing games together. And so because of that, I thought he was coming out with something from one of those games. I'd never heard the word neurodiverse before, and then he explained what he was talking about. And I got quite upset at him. And I was just like, look, stop trying to, like use this stuff here. I'm autistic. This is the important thing, that was something very important to me. So I found this new thing of neurodiversity quite a challenge, and to suddenly be told that I was neurodiverse. And as I've read into neurodiversity as well, I find it a little bit complex, and I don't necessarily like it as a concept, because I feel what's happened is a lot of different things have been brought together under a single banner. And I feel it doesn't necessarily mean that people actually get the care and attention that they require. But I'll stop there because I think it'll give Ash an opportunity to chat as well.
I think that's a really interesting point, Alex. For me, I actually feel quite empowered by the term neurodiverse. So I guess I've got a slightly different spin on it. But I think for me, that's also because I was diagnosed so late in life and you were diagnosed a lot earlier. So for me, I was diagnosed with ADHD just last year, October. So I was 32 years old and I already had PTSD from trauma. And so what I didn't know as well is a lot of women are diagnosed later in life or not at all, because the traditional view of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is that you are naughty boys in a classroom, and that's how it used to be seen. Whereas for women, we tend to be chatterboxes, very creative, very giving, very empathic. Those are some of the key traits of ADHD. And so finding out so late actually helped me to have a word or a label that I could immediately say, oh, I'm not broken, I'm not a failure, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm different, but I now have some tools. Some are invisible, some are people or support systems or that kind of thing. But it gave me a vocabulary and a different way of interpreting things. So I do feel it's been helpful, but I would agree with Alex on the point that it's quite a big catch-all banner. And one of the things that we're very aware of tonight is, and it's a shame Timmy's not here because he's so good with knowledge and data around healthcare inequalities, but we're very aware that we're educated, we have wonderful support systems, there are lots of things that across the neurodiversity banner, people have different challenges. Some might find certain tasks easier than others. So to have such a large catch-all banner could actually really be quite limiting for some people who maybe need more support. And I guess that's a really interesting thing to explore as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a researcher at Durham, and I know Durham boo hiss, but he is an academic researcher in dyslexia. And he's been on the news quite a bit over the last couple of years saying we use dyslexia too much as an umbrella term. And what happens is there's now a standard care. Oh, you're dyslexic, you need these things. And that's doing a disservice to people who have actually quite a broad range of learning difficulties and challenges. And they're not actually getting the appropriate one-to-one development care that they need because they're getting labeled as, oh, you're dyslexic, you need this, and there's nothing else. So that's I'm totally on board with that, and it kind of leads into sort of a follow-up question on this, which is, what do you think are the real issues with? I hesitate to use the term like pigeonholing, but in being grouped under these categories where it's, oh, you have or you are X or you are Y, so that means that you get like this standard of care or this sort of standard of accommodation in a workplace that may be unhelpful. I don't mind who answers that one first. Either of you can jump in.
I'll go first on this one because I think with Alex, Alex and I are both self-employed, both entrepreneurs, but I feel like I've been employed more recently in an organization. One of the things I think that's funny about pigeonholing is something I discovered since becoming a neurodivergent, knowing about it, is yellow notepads. So you can order yellow notepads, which are just writing paper with lines, but they're yellow. And that's because black ink on yellow paper looks so much easier to read for people who struggle with dyslexia or some other neurodiverse challenges. The thing that I found interesting is I don't have that issue. So I've tried writing on yellow paper and I really struggle, but I do need to write in color. So my point there is sometimes we can make adjustments, or we can think that something is the same for everyone when it's not the case. And actually that might mean that without that tailored approach, or actually asking the person what they need, asking the person and including them in their own discussion about, helping them with what support would really make a difference, I think that's where we can make a mistake in organizations. So just to illustrate a point on that, with having PTSD, the thing about trauma and PTSD is you can have flashbacks at any time, and it's really challenging because if you say to someone, I have PTSD, or I experience trauma, or I experience flashbacks, they don't know what to say. They don't know how to cope with that. It's kind of too much information. But a really practical thing if you're in an organization is if someone comes up behind you and scares you because they make a sudden noise or something like that. It's happened to me before where I've literally shrieked and I've got so scared and had an absolute meltdown because I had a flashback. And I remember the person saying, whoa, that was so dramatic. But for me, that was a trigger. So I feel like simple things that organizations can do, if you are someone who has PTSD, it might be that you sit at the back of the room where you can have a clear view of everyone coming in. And then that takes away that issue straight away. But I do think it's really important not to put everyone in the same category. And I'd love to hear Alex's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, so I'll start slightly further back because, as Ash mentioned, obviously I've got an earlier diagnosis. So I'm happy to mention I was expelled from 2 schools before I got to a school called Cademere International School, which sadly closed down due to financial issues. Again, mainly because of its success. Too many students went to university, not enough new students came in, and so it had a financial deficit and went under. But the interesting thing about it was that, for me, the way I look at it is, I was told I was autistic, and I learned about autism and stuff like that. And for me, it's no different than the color of my eyes. It's entirely a part of me. Welcome, it's good to see you, mate. Yeah, so I'll just continue, sorry. Yeah, no different than the color of my eyes. It's entirely a part of me. So the whole thing is that I can't separate it. It's everything, a whole situation of how I am. And so when it comes to the umbrella of neurodiversity, I find it's complex because I'm also dyslexic. And so when I'm dyslexic, I have autism and dyslexia, but then within that whole bundle as well, I wrote this down before I came in just so I could refer to it and not get it wrong. But you can see that there's under neurodiversity, it's mental health, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ADHD, Tourette's, and sorry, one second, I can't even read my own handwriting there, but there's a huge amount there. And going back to sort of touching on what Ash said as well, is that each one of those requires a specialist form of care. And within them, there's subcategories as well of care. People, I mentioned this when we were doing our preparation, we talked about the book, The Curious Instinct of the Dead Dog in the Night. And in that book, I remember when I was going to a new school after my first school where I received care, I was sitting down with the headmaster having an interview, and the headmaster said, "Oh, have you read that book?" And I said, "I hate that book because it makes out that everyone with autism, has a good day dependent on red or yellow cars," which is hilarious because the number of yellow cars we see around today would suggest that all of us are having really terrible days, but that's another matter entirely. But that's the sort of thing there. He had read that book and he thought, oh, that's how autism looks. And it's a huge spectrum of different things. So my issue with neurodiversity comes from the fact that there is then, as you mentioned with dyslexia, you know, a standard package of care that's been created now for neurodiversity, which I feel as well, when you create that, we should instead break it down to what it was before, and then look at those things and give the care to the specific area, rather than going, all right, all of you are neurodiverse, which I think leads to the possibility of, you know, people going, all right, we've got a neurodiverse officer within the workplace, neurodiverse officer within X, Y, and Z. They'll handle it all. And it almost becomes like how you know, a position within a faculty, which means that people get left behind in school, education, workplace. And that's my concern, that people who, with care, can actually function to many different specialist levels, many different ways, or even just have a good life. It doesn't matter about how much you produce or how much sorry, I'm trying to remember the correct words here. I do apologize, I'm a little bit tired tonight. What the result of what you do is, it's just the fact that these people should have a life that is comfortable and attainable for you know, for life, for comfort. So that's kind of my point of view. That's why I struggle so much with the term neurodiverse.
That's great, and a really involved like points from both of you. And I think during that conversation we spotted Timmy make an appearance. So if he's got a stable connection, it'd be great for him to join us, which he is. Timmy, good evening. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. I'm so sorry that I haven't got a fancy background like everybody else, but it's good to be here.
That's quite all right. Thanks very much for being able to join us. It's absolutely great. Just really quickly, I'll give you. Can you sort of introduce yourself and what you do and everything else like that, and then we'll include you in the conversations.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Apologies that I'm late. I just landed into the country literally like a few hours ago. My name is Timmy. I'm a research assistant in health economics at the Newcastle University. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 4. And for the last 2 years, I run an online platform, mainly on Instagram, called The Black Dyslexic. So I focus on raising awareness in neurodiversity, specifically in the BAME community, and not just in the UK, but globally. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thanks very much for joining. It's great to have you as part of the discussions. I'm just going to jump to one of the live questions, which links to some of the conversations too we've been having, which is how useful or lack of usefulness is there in having the labels of neurodiversity and disability. And somebody in the chat has asked, when you're talking about labels, do you find some people get offended when you talk about neurodiversity as a disability, because they find a really mixed response between those two things, and whether or not how you basically combat that if you need to. So I think because he's first, I'll go back to Timmy on this question. Do you sort of find, what kind of response do you get when you talk about neurodiversity as a disability?
It's interesting because I think we need to understand when we talk about labels, especially with neurodiversity, it's a very, very new concept. It was first used by Judy Singer in the late 90s. So, you know, we are talking 20 to 25 years, you know. So we're still trying to, as a society, we're still trying to figure it out. I can see why people get offended. Nobody likes to see. I think one thing that's happened with neurodiversity and all the conditions under it, it's been pathologized. So, because that's how we've looked at it for a long time. So associating autism and dyspraxia and dyslexia as there's something wrong with you, because these things originally stem from medicine and stuff. But as things have evolved, neurodiversity was not a medical term. Judy Singer, the person that discovered it, it's not clinicians, it's a sociologist. So she was just this, and so it's that differences of disciplines and stuff like that, which cause certain people to be offended and unoffended. But I think for me personally, I feel like there are advantages and disadvantages. And I think it's very important to know your audience. And also I feel like an individual has a right to be offended and not offended on a particular term. So we need to be careful and know who you're talking to about a particular thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Alex and Ash, do you have anything to add sort of in terms of that sort of mixed response? I can see the hand straight up from Ash.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this. In fact, I would say that with ADHD, it's a difference rather than a disability. I feel some people call it a superpower. There are some things that I am just so good at. Like, I can make stuff happen really fast. For instance, I'm setting up the creative studio and you won't believe what's been going on in the last few days, but that's because I'm able to hyper focus on certain activities and get things done in very unique ways or solve problems very creatively. And I know from friends or colleagues I've worked with, they've always said, you know, you bring so much positivity to the team, you bring so much new ideas or this kind of thing. At the same time, I would say that I'm disabled when it comes to certain tasks. One of the things with ADHD is executive functioning. So for instance, even something like making a cup of coffee can take me 5 hours, and that sounds ridiculous, but actually that is because I'll start making a cup of coffee and I'll forget what I'm doing, and I'll remember I need milk, and then I'll go to the shop and I'll lock myself at the house and I'll have to get the locksmith, and then I'll get in and I'll have left my purse at the shop, and it's a really long story. But my point is the steps that you need to do sometimes can take a really long time to work out. So in one way, I would have super abilities, and in another way, I'd be really struggling with day-to-day tasks. And so what I would like to say that I think is really important, especially when we're thinking about labels, differences, disabilities, is one of the things that we should all be mindful of is what are the neurodiverse things that people don't want to talk about as well. So sure, we talk about autism, sure, we talk about things like you know, ADHD and other things, but there are things like borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, you know, other challenges that people are so ashamed sometimes to talk about. And I think that stigma can cause a lot of problems. And even with the ADHD diagnosis that I've had so recently, and with autism, seeing this with friends, there's often a fear of being different. You know, I've had friends say to me, I just don't know how to interact with you anymore. And I've lost friends since my diagnosis, and that's been really hard. So I do think we need to be careful about, with labels, how helpful they are, whether it's a disability, a difference, or a superpower, but also who is being excluded from that conversation, you know, and how can we educate ourselves as organizations, as colleagues, and as families and friends to help each other really have a more productive conversation around this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Alex, have you got anything to add into that? I've got a really interesting question that I can head on to if not. That's
I think it depends on how the person views disability. So like, for instance, on all government forms, when I'm asked, are you disabled? I say no. Or like when you fill in a form and it says, do you consider yourself disabled? I say no, because I always think that there might be someone else who requires that help more than me. I'm quite a capable individual. There's stuff I struggle with, and I try and seek support from the correct groups and correct ways of doing that. And my disability, if you call autism a disability, is invisible. You know, people hear my accent, they look at me. I'm, you know, 6'1", physically able and strong. And so people would never, because of the way I speak, the way I hold myself, stuff like that, they would never see my autism. So because of that, that can be a disadvantage as well, because if I'm struggling in any way, shape or form, it's hidden. I can't express it. And that means I've had to come up with coping mechanisms. And also there's an element of fear from the normal, if that makes sense. Because I remember growing up, I had a member of my family who basically said to me, look, because of your autism, it's much easier for them to lock you up if ever anything happened. Because I would, especially around the age of between 7 and 9, and I got actually expelled from a school because of fighting, because of the fact I couldn't comprehend the social interactions. I struggled in situations, then people didn't respond in the correct manners to me. And then that caused for me to get more and more upset and then result in fighting. And so because of that, I was told by a member of my family, I was just like, look, if you do that, if you fight, it's easier for them to lock you away. It's easier for you to be sent to prison because of the fact you're considered mentally ill. And so there was that fear of the other, the normal, if that makes sense, because of the fact that they have power over me. So that's one of my things as well. It's like, how, when you look at disability, is it like, first of all, how does a person perceive disability? Because I think if I spoke to Timmy, Timmy and to Ashley, both of you would understand where I'm coming from. But if I took Joe Public on the street, they might see disability as a wheelchair, or they might see disability as something else. And it's just the way it's understood. But most of all, it's just to say that those aren't negative things, if that makes sense. When I say a wheelchair, I'm not being disparaging against people in wheelchairs.
Sure, absolutely, totally agree. Sorry, Timmy, yeah.
Just to interject, we also have to remember that certain people that have more severe disabilities than the issues that we have, may actually be offended that we consider ourselves disabled like they are. So it's a very, very delicate issue, and it depends on what. This is why I say it depends who you're talking to. It's important to know your audience, because as Alex said, we're talking about hidden differences. So to someone who is more, and not to cause offense to anyone who has difficulty hearing or difficulty seeing, if I'm saying, yes, I'm disabled too, it's like, and a really good example, people who are, as far as I'm aware, people who are autistic or ADHD, there's no neurodiversity bracket in the Paralympics, for example. Like that's, you don't see that, despite the fact that dyspraxia, for example, is to do with coordination and your ability to coordinate yourself in sport. So these are the type of things, and the reason because these are still very new terms. The world, we're still getting used to figuring, okay, where do we actually put these things in society?
Just to interject as well, just to bring the tone down, because I know being very, very serious, but I'm having a wee chuckle. I'm dyspraxic as well. So the idea of me running in the 100 meters is making me have a massive chuckle right now. I'm a long distance walker, not a sprinter. So I find the idea of, a neurodiverse a member of the Paralympics, it tickles me.
Good. Good. Yeah, it's something I'd never thought about. You don't see Paralympians who are neurodiverse. It's almost always about physical disabilities. There's one more question I'm just going to ask about sort of labels and coping, and then I've got a really good question about employment. So I'll move on to that one. But a question's been asked, which is, and I think Alex, you partly answered this, was, has anyone faced the coping too well issue? This individual has had some people tell them, oh, you can't have Asperger's syndrome, you do small talk and make eye contact too well. And I want to reply, yes, but you don't see how much energy it takes me to behave like that. If I acted more disabled, would you be more supportive of me? And I think, Alex, you talked about that, about, it's part of who you are, and it's a hidden disability, and is it another physical? It's not something with somebody in a wheelchair. But I was just wondering if people had something to comment about that. Ash, I know that you wanted to come in on that one.
Sorry, did you ask me to speak on that?
Oh, sorry, no, Ash. Sorry, Ash. I'm sorry, that was me swallowing the word Ash. I apologize.
That's all right. Sorry, I thought you said Alex as well. So I think around coping too well, that is an issue that you see for many women. In fact, this is a really key issue, and why so many women are diagnosed later in life with autism or ADHD or other challenges. I think what happens for us, in my experience, and again, this is my experience, it's lived experience, I'm not an expert, but what I've seen from all the people who've reached out to me since I've been open about my ADHD and sharing things online is this idea that as young women, we try to be perfect. We want to be good girls. We want to be nice. When I was little, my teacher told me she'd chop my hands off if I didn't sit still. So I used to sit on my hands at school so that I wouldn't fidget, and my mind would be so hyperactive. And that's the thing, it's invisible. So you might be talking to me, but I might be in another world. And so I don't, but in my world, I've created the most amazing things. And so in class, you know, you might be behind, people might think you're behind, but actually you're bored, you know, or you've already done everything that you need to do, or you're just not learning in the right way because people aren't showing you, they're telling you. So things like, you know, making things more visual are really important, and things like this. But I feel for women, we do really struggle with this because we do cope well. We try to pretend everything's fine. We don't ask for help. It's too scary. For instance, I know in the workplace, I've shied away from applying for promotions because I know that I can't keep up with the emails, because one of the things that I really struggle with is notifications and emails. It's so overwhelming. And so but if you put me with people, I'm great face to face. So I think this is something as organizations, if you could equip people, you know, or if you could reduce the emails or make things more clear so that people have deadlines in their emails, or there's, you know, they're much more to the point. Because the other thing about coping really well is that sometimes we assume that people have the same experience as us. So, you know, you might give someone some information and you assume that they're hearing it in the same way or reading it in the same way that you are giving it. But actually, for many of us, you know, we don't know how to ask for help. We don't know how to admit that there's something wrong. And actually, that is a huge issue with many of us who are trying to cope. And I think the other challenge here, and I know Timmy will have, you know, more stats or background knowledge about this, but a lot of people really struggle to get diagnosed. They are waiting for years and years and years. I went private personally. It cost me a lot of money, but I was so ill that I had to do that. I couldn't wait 3 years for a diagnosis on the NHS. So another thing we could do, you know, how do we equip our doctors or our organizations, our universities to help students more, or, you know, make things more accessible? I think there's lots of points around there, but coping too well is a really difficult one for women.
Absolutely. I'm happy if anybody else wants to jump in, but if there's loads of questions, but we're definitely not going to get to all of them. So that's absolutely fine.
I think the socioeconomic aspect that what Ashley prepared is such an interesting and such a powerful thing, because yes, we know that university is a really good place for diagnosis and stuff, and you know there's support there. But the truth is, not everybody in society goes to university, and you know, and because of private is so quicker, is faster to get a diagnosis. What you'll find is actually the wealthier you are, the higher your socioeconomic status, you're more likely to perform better, quote unquote, in life as a neurodivergent individual compared to someone who is performing less socioeconomically. So that's another factor. And then when you think about, for example, if you throw in race into it, knowing that people who are Black are less likely to be wealthier individuals as well, you can see how complicated this discussion can be very quickly. So yeah, I'm really happy that you brought that up, Ashley.
It's great. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just one factor. There's a multiplicity of factors that all intersect that then have a massive impact on how people cope and how people present and how they're interacted and how they interact with others, both in general life and in work and profession and all the rest of it. There's a really good question that's actually come up from within the chat, which is, according to a recent ONS survey, which is from February, 78% of autistic adults are unemployed, including quite a lot of graduates. And what are your thoughts about the job market and academic institutions that what do they need to do to sort of remedy or further support people who have that sort of diagnosis to get them into employment? Because I know it's something that we've talked about, which is how our organization's set up for neurodiversity. And I think that's a really good question, which is what do people do to remedy that kind of really high unemployment stat? and I don't mind who comes in first on that one at all. Yes,
Alex, you go first.
Okay.
Sorry, I've been volunteered. It's a difficult one for me personally. I can't necessarily speak about workplaces, but I have a big belief in self-employment. The problem is that self-employment, normally you have to have a role model or a family member who inspires towards self-employment. I was very lucky. My mum was self-employed, and while she raised me and my brother alongside that as well, she was also self-employed, which inspired me later on to consider doing that as well. Though at the time I didn't realize it was self-employment as such. I think the issue for me is, I think we've all touched on this a little bit, is it's the time of diagnosis that will affect long-term and will actually help you towards employment, because the more, when I use the term coping strategy, I don't think it's the right term, because it suggests that it suggests more towards a pain or a brokenness, which is not what I'm suggesting. But like a coping strategy could be like, I work this way. Ash has already touched on yellow paper and how it doesn't work for her. You know, that for some people is a good coping strategy. That means that they can perform to an equal or above level to other people. And I think that it's finding out how you work will then help out. And that is really key with the earlier diagnosis. So you can learn to then, alongside learning everything else that you have to through school, through university, through all of those things, through promotion and through your work life. And also this will have a massive impact because you're also learning your social life as well. Because this is the other thing, is that most of the things under neurodiversity affect your social interaction. So it's not just about your 9 to 5 behind the desk, or in my case, out and about talking to people, that sort of thing. It's about your social interactions. It's about the people you live with and learning how to best do that so that you can then do it well. And all of that comes together. And so I think that the earlier diagnosis, which then adds into our education system, and recognizing this as early as possible is the big thing there for me. And that will then lead to employment in the future, because you can't, like, I get so frustrated when I've met a number of young men who had very similar, like, sort of stories to mine, but have very different outcomes because their families have been maybe told at different points, well, this is only as far as they'll be able to go, or this is the opportunities they have for them because they have autism. And it's not the case that everyone has to be like suddenly a Rain Man character. That's also another example of a stereotype, as I've mentioned earlier on. The curious incident of the dead dog is the opposite side, and neurodiversity, autism and neurodiversity should be viewed more like a circle than it should be as a up, down, high, low functioning, etc., that sort of thing. But like that's the sort of thing that we're dealing with here. Is it's like helping people to not to fit into society, but to be able to interact within society that will then result in employment, in my opinion. But that's me coming from my perspective. I hand over to people with much more knowledge than myself.
I had an answer just about alumni. So for instance, we're alumni of Newcastle University and Newcastle University Business School. And I know some people joining won't be alumni or students or maybe supporters of the university. But in relation to the employment question and equipping graduates, one of the challenges in alumni relations or with alumni records is we can't store any information about whether someone is neurodivergent, LGBT, their race, their faith, anything like that. So what happens is people put themselves forward for activities, or people who are openly vocal about activities that they want to support are approached to help the university. And this happens across the UK and across the world. And so I do think there's lots of universities with fantastic schemes that do help students. I know that I'm involved with the Career Insights program at Newcastle University. So I will be mentoring, students who are like me or have similar challenges, particularly around trauma and PTSD. What I would say though, is if you look at the data around volunteering, again, it's not fair in the sense that it's not equal. So you've got social inequalities there, especially around income. So what Timmy was saying earlier about certain groups might be marginalized, or they maybe have lower social income, and they might not have time to go and mentor at a university, or they might not have those networks. At the same time, that might feel like it's not a place they can go into. It might feel intimidating. On another note, you've also got a lot of people doing work in their own communities, so it might not be recognized on a big stage, or in any kind of press or anything like that, but they still making a huge difference in their local communities. So I think it's quite important that we do, well, it's so important that we do equip our students, our graduates, but at the same time, I've seen some of the questions tonight as well. How much are organizations actually putting their money where their mouth is, and they're not just wanting to tick a box and do, an inclusivity thing where they get some extra funding or they look good for PR, but how much are we actually changing for people who have real struggles and asking them about their struggles? That's what I would want to know.
Absolutely.
A really good question. I would say it takes time. With any conversation on diversity and inclusion, we're talking about changes in mindset, changes in culture and stuff. And I think conversations like this, which are happening more often in the last few years, is definitely a good step in the right direction. And I think as we have more discussions, we'll have more awareness, and that would lead us to better ideas. I think it's really hard for us to give you, okay, if you have a neurodivergent employee, follow these 7 steps, because every neurodivergent individual is completely different. And so what may work for me may not work for Ashley, may not work for Alex, And so I think one thing that is really, really important is that companies, big or small, should have at least 1 or 2 people in their HR team that is equipped with as much information as they can on neurodiversity. What I would like to see is, if I disclose my dyslexia to my employer shouldn't ask me, what's that? Or can give me, we need to break that barrier first, There should be at least 1 member of staff. And I think Newcastle and university and most universities are generally quite good at that. So HR is really important. And also I wanted to, for graduates as well, I wanted to just mention employability, which is a really good company that specializes in placing disabled students, but also neurodivergent individuals in the workplace. So in top grad schemes like law firms, finance, financial services, etc. And they've been recognized for their work as well. So I'm happy to leave a link in the chat, or send it via email if that's helpful.
That'd be really helpful. Yes, please do. I actually think something that you've all touched on actually comes up to a question that's been asked by somebody in the chat, which is, if, say, an autistic adult, start that again. If an autistic adult gets a job, at what point should they disclose their diagnosis, or should they not, or should they only disclose it if they're not coping and need extra adjustments? The individual put, let me just roll back. They have a son who has a multiplicity of diagnoses, and he's got a full-time job, but it's a short term. It's covering sick leave. Should he disclose that sort of diagnosis in order to get more accommodations, or is it because it's a short-term job, it's not worth it, and all that sort of process? So is there I guess the question is like, at what point do you disclose a diagnosis? Is it something that you're upfront with all the time, or are there situations where you think actually it's not important, or it might even be detrimental to suddenly say, oh, by the way, I have this diagnosis, and all of a sudden there's, oh, well, we're not going to renew your short-term contract or whatever it is. I'll come to Ash because Ash keeps putting a hand up, so I'll keep going to Ash first.
I think as a manager, you know, it's so much nicer if you know what your team have and are struggling with, but then not every manager is the same. So what I mean by that is, where I have had staff who I've managed who maybe have autism or other differences, what I've experienced is sometimes the way that they interact with their colleagues may lack certain social nuances, but they wouldn't see that or understand it. And so what I've experienced before is that sometimes in that type of thing, in an organization, in a workplace, people will gossip about that person, they'll say horrible things, and they just so misunderstood, and it's not what they really feel or how they meant to come across. So I think in my experience as a manager and my own experience as someone with a difference, I much prefer the honesty and being able to help someone or talk about things in a much more productive way. So you can, you know, you can say, hey, you know, this happened the other day. What do you think happened there? And then they might not have any idea that they've actually upset somebody or something like this, but you can have a discussion and you can really help them. At the same time, like I said, not everyone's going to be like that. I feel that there is something that I've come across recently. So there's something called Access to Work, which has been really phenomenal for me. As a entrepreneur, you can access this as well. And there's a great agency, which I'll put a link in the comments, called This Is Me, for entrepreneurs that you can access this support. But for anyone who is differently abled or has any challenges, there is something called Access to Work. You do have to go through some, you know, sessions with the Department of Work and Pensions and this kind of thing, but they can give you lots of support. So you can maybe have someone to help you with your emails or to, you know, do things in a different way or get information in a different way. Again, the problem there is, are the organizations actually going to carry through with that? Are they actually going to follow through with what's agreed? You know, because sometimes we have HR, you know, teams and departments that will agree something in principle, but in reality, on an operational basis, it just doesn't happen. And I think that's where we have a huge issue for the future of work. As Timmy said, this is, you know, a new concept from the 90s, neurodivergence. How do we catch up? Because I don't feel like we have.
Great. Sorry, Timmy, yeah, go ahead.
In terms of when to disclose and if to disclose, it's very much a personal choice. It's up to you. I think one thing to remember is that when you're looking for a job, you're not just proving to them, to your employer, that you are the best candidate with them. You also want the employer to prove that they're the best employer for you. So you have to ask yourself, so even though they're interviewing you, you also have to ask yourself, can I work here? Can I thrive here? Can I maximize my potential here? And one of the best ways to do that is to be very open and very thorough, like, this is me. But in my personal experience, I found that disclosing meant I disclosed when I was looking for work, I disclosed for 8 months and got nothing. Then I stopped disclosing and said, okay, I would only disclose once I get the interview, once I get like accepted and stuff. And then I got like three offers the month later. So it's what it is, because whether we like it or not, there is bias, there is prejudice, you know, and you can have as much training as you want and stuff. When somebody comes across something different that is not the norm, it's likely to be like, okay, how can I do this? Especially, and also it depends on the organization as well. Some small companies may not just have the infrastructure to actually give you the support that you need. So I actually mentioned access to work, which is great. But access to work do require employees to provide, to contribute to some of the support. Now, if you're talking about a company or an institution like Newcastle University, yes, the budget is there. But if you're talking about a startup that has 3 or 4 employers, they're less likely to give you the support. But then as a neurodivergent individual, you have to ask yourself which company is best for you.
Yes, Alex.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow on with that though, if you have a startup, the whole startup is, what I've seen throughout the whole startup scene or like small business scene in Newcastle, and maybe I'm just speaking about Newcastle, but I think it would be replicated in other places, is that a business of that size is based on relationships, not employing people for roles. Because the fact that you're going, all right, okay, I need Ash to do that, but I know she's great at that. You know, Timmy can do this and you're great at that too. And then you come together and you cover each other's weaknesses, especially in a business where you've got 4 or 5 members. So like, just for like someone who's thinking, all right, maybe I'm going to go into a startup or an early company, go in as well, just knowing that you can say, right, yeah, I'm like this, but there's going to have to, like, just the thing is with a startup as well is that, you know, you're on call 24 hours a day. So there's, you know, you're going to be getting involved in everything, but you're going to disclose from the start. So like, if I went into a startup now, I'd disclose that I have a 1-year-old. So like, I'm going to say, look, at certain points, I'm not going to answer my emails because I'm going to be looking after my child. You know, at other points, that's the sort of thing as well. From a disclosure point of view, I very rarely disclose unless it comes up in conversation, mainly because of the fact that I don't always think that maybe it's my own beliefs of like the views that people have towards autism from where I've grown up from. I will disclose it if it comes up in conversation, and I'll be very open about it then, but I've never had to go to job interviews as such and say, oh, you know, this is how I am. Because the way I experience things is very much internal and doesn't often come across openly.
Yeah, and I do think it is very different between applying to major organizations and startups, and it's almost a cop-out. Like, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but it's also your own comfort about when you want to disclose to either people you're employing, asking to be employed by, or when you're applying for funding or any of those things. It is I don't think there's one right answer. It really does vary. We've literally got 5 minutes left, and I can't believe we've barely started talking about this. We could easily go for another hour, but I know people need to get off. So I'm just going to finish up with one question. And to everybody who's asked questions in the chat, I'm really sorry if we haven't got to them. We will endeavour to sort of follow up with you after the fact and provide answers to the questions that you've asked. But somebody asked, how does the panel see the Sunflower Lanyard initiative as a way of helping people who are neurodiverse? If people have seen this, I wasn't actually aware of this, so it's actually new to me. So
I saw a sign for it for the first time the other day. I think I was in Wilco's or something like that. But it's funny because I was so angry because I was in a long queue and I had to wait for a cashier, and there was someone by the till, but it was a self-serve till, and I had all these things to carry. Going in a shop is quite stressful for me anyway, because I'm very impulsive. That's one of the issues with ADHD. So I just can very easily buy too much stuff. And so I find it very stressful, and I wanted to go faster, but I wasn't sure how to work the equipment. And I was so rude to this person, and I did apologize, but I was just stressed. And so I think in those instances, having a way to signal that maybe there is something that you struggle with, and maybe you need a bit of extra help, or it's not intentional, it's not on purpose. And then, rather than, I don't know, potentially creating an issue, I have considered getting one, but I'm not sure again about signaling to others that I have a difference. you know, and I think that could be said around things like LGBT rainbow lanyards, or, you know, maybe people who identify as non-binary, you know, having a lanyard that is trans colors or something like that. Do we want to put labels on ourselves again? You know, so I'm not sure, but I'd be interested to hear Alex and Timmy's thoughts.
Alex, to you, I know you had your hand up when we were talking about this one.
First thing that popped into my mind is because I know about the sunflower thing, and I know a couple of different people who've worn it, but the problem is now is that lanyards have also, just with the circumstances of our world, are now very much associated with, you know, not needing to wear a mask. And the whole cushion. So the probability is that if you had that, and let's say a member of staff, or there's a circumstance you're in, they don't look close enough, then suddenly, you know, there's a different set of perceptions that are connected to that particular lanyard, especially when the colors are so similar. So for me personally, I'm just like, I wouldn't necessarily, well, obviously I've mentioned before, I wouldn't wear one because of my own views and how I present myself. But at the same time, I just worry for those who wear one that could be misunderstood so quickly and easily, and therefore double down on the problem. And so that's one of the issues there. It requires that level of training for the staff members or the organization to recognize that, not only recognize it, but then correctly respond under stress, and then put into action the care that requires for that individual. And so that's the thing that I would first and foremost think about. I'm just like, the way that has changed in meaning is just so strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd quickly say from my perspective, from somebody who doesn't have a diagnosis, it's I have a rainbow lanyard but that's me just saying that I support LGBT. It's not that I am, and so you need people to understand what that lanyard means, but B, how do you then differentiate between me being like, well, I want to be supportive, so I'm going to wear a lanyard that said, but from my perspective, it's I'm being supportive of this thing, versus somebody who's wearing to say, I am this, whatever the lanyard is, trans, LGBT, something like whatever it is, and all of a sudden you've got this dichotomy of, are you saying that you need extra help, or that you identify in this way, or are you just supporting people that do? And all of a sudden it becomes even more convoluted, because you then don't know whether or not that person's going to be not offended but surprised to say, oh no, I just wear it because I'm supportive, which adds a whole extra layer of complication as to whether or not that's a useful thing to do. Timmy, have you got any? Would you like to come in really quickly before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's really, I get the advantages of letting people to know that we're different, but I think I have some interesting views of it's very important. Well, I agree, it's very important for people to make sure that people are aware of their differences, but we shouldn't allow a certain part of our identity form our whole identity. And I'm very wary that having a lanyard on certain things, that's would move us towards that direction. You understand? Whether that person is LGBT or neurodivergent, or male or female, it's just a component of their identity and not all of it. But I feel like a lanyard would reinforce that rather than suggest what I'm saying. So I'm not really for lanyards, in my opinion. And also I feel like the issue with neurodiversity and stuff, it's something that should come up in conversation, so that where I get to tell you how dyspraxia affects me and its impact that's happened on me, and that would actually reinforce the fact that it affects everybody differently. If you just sing a lanyard, you're like, oh, okay, you don't know, number one, what neurodivergence I have. You just confine me into a box, which I think that is not ideal at all.
Yeah, it's a really important point that while it does indicate, it doesn't actually specify for people the particulars of each individual and what their needs might be. So I totally agree. I'm unfortunately going to have to wrap it up there because we've absolutely blown through the hour that we set, and we've barely got to any of the conversations, the questions that have been put in the chat. So again, if you've asked a question we haven't answered it, I'm very sorry. We will try and get back to you after the event and reply to you with some context and some details to your answer. We are about to just launch a really quick poll for you to provide feedback on the event. So please, when it pops up, you take 5 seconds just to click how you felt about the event. It's really helpful for us to know if we're on the right track. I'd like to thank all of our panelists again so much for bringing their experiences, their insight, their wisdom to this kind of topic. I know it's a really complicated topic and we've barely touched the surface. So that's really useful. I'd like to thank everybody who's attended as well. These events only go so well and have so much interactivity when you guys are involved and you ask the questions. So thank you very much for being involved. And a final thing before I bid you all good night. Remember, we do have one more week of Alumni Day of Action stuff coming up. Next week is Race, Religion and Migration. And there is our annual convocation, which allows you to sort of chat to the VC and ask him questions about how the university is being run. So if you can make any of those, they're on our website on the events page. Please sign up if you're interested. Thank you again to everybody who's attended. Thank you again to our panelists. Have a lovely rest of your day, evening, wherever you are. I hope to see you at an event soon. Good night, everybody.